Hello and welcome to Don't Run Into Glass, a podcast hosted by the Citizen.in. I'm Gayeti.
And I'm Anica.
And today's episode is titled Grandma Curtains versus Fast Fashion. Anica, what are grandma curtains?
Grandma curtains are these green floral curtains my nani bought in Manchester a long time ago, which she hung in a beautiful bungalow for many years. After a few years, my mom and both her brothers were wearing those as dungarees, as shorts, a frock, etc. Until today, we have remnants of that garment in our house as serviettes, as something to clean the table, as a tea cozy. So that's grandma curtains.
And that's so cool because I feel like almost every Indian household has that story. Maybe perhaps now less and less, but at least our parents' generation, every single household had that story in some form. I think this conversation has become all the more relevant today because of this entire Sabyasachi into H&M collaboration controversy, for lack of a better word, because it's literally all over my Instagram feed and WhatsApp groups. It's all anyone is talking about.
Mine too.
Right? It's almost getting like, let's speak about something else now, but here we are doing this podcast on the same subject, but I think there's a lot of disappointment that somebody who was considered a custodian of handloom revival and craftsmanship in India has collaborated with a fast fashion brand.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. Sabyasachi was one that upheld the dignity of the artisans. I remember seeing him first time at Lakme Fashion Week at the grand finale, and we were celebrating him because he brought these ikats out. And now suddenly with him collaborating with H&M, where his designs will literally self-combust in a year's time, is something that is difficult to wrap your head around, really.
Yeah, and we'll chat a little bit more about that. And just to introduce today's guests as well, there was an article that we published in the Citizen.in that was titled Why Your Nani is the Ultimate Sustainable Fashion Influencer. It very much in the vein of Grandma Curtains. The article was in collaboration with the Remember Who Made Them campaign, which advocates for workers' rights. And like the name says, the campaign is to remember who made your clothes. So we have Swatee Deepak from that campaign joining us today. And we have Kinita Shenoy, who wrote the article for The Citizen. Kinita is a communication specialist. And Kinita's article was largely about how practices of sustainability are very much deeply rooted within South Asian tradition. So it should be an interesting conversation with the two of them. So let's invite them on.
Hey. Okay, welcome Swatee and Kinita. Swatee, we've been so excited to learn more about your Remember Who Made Them project. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about that project, please?
Sure. I'm so excited to be on this podcast. Thank you so much, and delighted to join the three of you as well. So I'm Swatee. I work as a social justice consultant. So I work across racial, gender justice and social justice movements around the world. And I look at their resourcing and their support, visibility and amplification. And I also work across the arts as well. And Remember Who Made Them came together in 2020, just catalyzed by the COVID crisis and just this knowledge that the biggest brands in the world who are literally making billions on trillions of dollars in the fashion industry were not paying their workers for back orders. So there was billions that was not being paid to the poorest people around the world. And although there are a number of brilliant campaigns, Fashion Revolution, Remake, there's so many incredible clean clothes campaign, there are incredible projects, but we felt like there was an additional element of visibility that we wanted to give to garment workers specifically during that plight. And so all of the four of us, myself, Ruby, Devi, and Venetia, we all come from campaigning, social justice, feminist activist backgrounds. And when you look at the stats of fashion, it really does, it really hammers it home. It's a $3 trillion industry. It accounts for 2% of the global GDP. 1 in 6 people on the planet work in fashion. 80% of garment workers are women. And, second to oil, clothing and textiles is the largest polluter on the planet. So in terms of all of the social justice causes that you care about, be them about race, about gender, about climate, about fair working, about poverty, fashion is an industry that cuts across all of them. And it felt like a really important time to actually center the voices and remember the people who make our clothes. So the garment workers, the dyers, the sewers, the packers on the factory floor. And so we wanted to come together and create a campaign that really lifted and visibilized their voices. So we started a podcast series last year, and then a social media campaign to amplify those voices and explore, fashion's interconnections with race, with feminism, with labor organizing, with capitalism, with climate crisis, and with conscious consumption. So that's really where the campaign started from. And it was really about trying to remember more garment workers. And we are part of a number of different working groups now with sort of like global, the Pay Your Workers campaign, the Pay Her campaign. There's many that different activists and different groups come together on. So we really bring that garment worker voice and trying to visibilize and amplify those interconnections across.
Yeah, super exciting. And in fact, it was the Remember Who Made Them campaign. So Kinita's article for The Citizen was part of the Remember Who Made Them campaign. And Kinita, we wanted to talk a little bit about your larger point in that article, which was that sustainability is very much rooted in South Asian tradition. So yeah, let's reflect a little bit on that. Do you think things are changing, and or is there still, are we still seeing a lot of sustainable practices in South Asia?
I think that there is a change that's happening. Let me say, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And it's awesome to be with the three of you before I jump into my speech. But what I really feel is that there is a change. And unfortunately, I feel that the change is negative. I think a lot of the practices that were a large part of our lives growing up are no longer there in terms of, handmade clothes, a lot of mending, a lot of sewing. And to be fair, let me be very clear that I understand that a lot of those practices were also from the unpaid labor of the women in our family, our women folk. But now that unpaid labor has now shifted to underpaid labor of other South Asian women. And so I guess my point is that even though we feel that we're moving up economically, a lot of families now see fast fashion as a way to wealth signal. I think that there's a big problem in how we approach sustainability, particularly in the Indian subcontinent, because it's something that is seen as a very white-centric, a very global north-centric idea, but it's not. It's a big part of the fabric of our society. And so something that I think is very important is to move away from this very white-centric, very global north-centric form of sustainability and go back to the roots of how this has worked for us. Because right now, a lot of people around the world are becoming increasingly serious about environmental justice. But something that we need to remember is that environmental justice cannot be divorced from racial justice. It cannot be divorced from gender justice. And so this is one of the principles that the Remember Who Made Them campaign is so good at bringing out as well, for us to really come back and remember the roots of fast fashion. Who is making them? Do they have the rights to advocate for themselves? Are they being paid adequately? Is their labor being honored? And so I think these are all really interesting things for us to think about, particularly from a South Asian perspective as well.
Yeah, interesting. And I just wanted to sort of like draw attention to why Anica and I decided to even have this conversation immediately. It's also because this recent collaboration between Sabyasachi and H&M is all over our Instagram feeds. It's all anyone is talking about. And the main conversation is whether, Sabyasachi, who is somebody known for handloom revival and craft revival in India and in South Asia, has partnered with a huge fast fashion brand. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's quite interesting because, it's been all across, every social media platform right now. But I think the reason why it's rubbing people the wrong way is that this collaboration is an exemplar of the fast fashion industry that takes, art forms or takes cultural practices and artisans' work, and then sort of dilutes it into this very quick, very easily produced, very mass-produced form of fashion. So it takes something that, a Sabyasachi product would have taken maybe a year to conceptualize, to create, to source, and that is being diluted into a very quick turnaround. Things that would have been made by hand, things that would have used, hyper localized artisans, is now just being, printed, mass printed on viscose. And of course it rubs people the wrong way. But I think that also a lot of the anger seems to be placed towards Sabyasachi, as opposed to the anger being placed towards H&M as this global brand that has been historically involved in sketchy practices, and in 2021 still does not pay all of its workers a living wage. So I think that the questioning needs to be focused on the big brand that is actually culpable. And I certainly understand people's ire, but I think that we need to focus our energy correctly as well.
That's really interesting, Kinita, because I like the point that you mentioned about how the artisans have come up with these patterns and come up with these designs, and now that is being mass produced. And very interesting that you also say that the anger needs to be managed, where it's not just Sabyasachi, but it's also H&M. Now, to that thought, I want to ask you, while Sabyasachi mass produces his fantastic designs that we've adored for so long, and now it comes, to our store close by and becomes and increases our consumption pattern. So what are your tips on buying less and buying better? And this question goes to both Swatee and Kinita, but we can start with Kinita right now. Yeah.
I actually think that the pandemic, I hate to say the phrase, the pandemic is an opportunity, because it's such a gross phase fundamentally, but the pandemic has been an opportunity to reevaluate what our priorities are. I can say that I really haven't bought anything nearly the last 2 years because I'm not going anywhere. Nobody is seeing me. And I think that this is a great opportunity to reevaluate what is actually important to us. So the biggest tip for just not buying stuff is self-explanatory. Like, if you don't need it, don't buy it. We have no one to impress anymore. The days of us being these, very visible creatures has kind of gone. People aren't really interested in snapping their cute new outfits twice a day. And I'd like to think those days are gone. And so for me, I hate to say it, but it's been very easy to just not buy anything because I'm not going anywhere. I'm not seeing anybody. So this is terrible advice because it's unique perhaps to just homebodies like me, but I think it's working.
Swatee, what are your comments on the Sabyasachi and H&M collaboration, and what are your tips on buying less and buying better?
So I think I really agree with everything that Kinita had said. I think that at the base of it, it's like, I think people are annoyed with the Sabyasachi and H&M collection. And I agree that the mass of the criticism seems lauded at Sabyasachi, but it's also because he's built his brand on, artisan, heirloom, pieces, things that are timeless, that last a lifetime. And all of these things are sort of completely upended when you partner with a fast fashion brand, which is, taking hand block prints that, is an artisan form from India, from South Asia, that is the core of livelihoods in small villages and places, across the country, across the region. And, suddenly for that to be mass produced on machines onto plastic, polyester and viscose, which is, made from plastic and the remnants of fossil fuels as well. Like, for those that care about the environment, it's also, there is no sustainable practice. We also know that H&M is one of the brands that has no traceability. It can't tell you who is really making those clothes. So, where Sabyasachi has put its brand on working with these artisans and lifting up these timeless generational techniques, suddenly you have people who are, 80% of the women in the supply chain are earning less than $21 a month, and they are living in perpetual poverty. They don't have enough money to accumulate to actually bring themselves out of it. So it's like, these are, exploited people within the workplace. H&M is well known globally for its extremely extractive and exploitative practices. Even just recently, it was the anniversary of Rana Plaza in Bangladesh, which killed so many different workers because of, the onus of those factories being on production, as opposed to on the safety and the security of the workers, and so many people died. And the anniversary of it came up, all the brands had to re-sign the Bangladesh Accord, which is about securing the safety and security of those workers. And H&M is one of the brands that has not re-signed the accord. Like, why? How is that a sustainable practice? How is that signaling that they really care about their workers at all? And so, for me, I think that I've always just, like most people in South Asia have, looked up to Sabyasachi's brand, have adored some of those techniques, and loved the fact that he's championed things like khadi, different other, historical and heirloom techniques. And now it just feels like that feels shattered because of the direction that it's suddenly taken to something that is buying into a mass consumption model. And mass consumption models, let's be clear, none of the fast fashion models are ever going to be sustainable, because at the moment there are 21 billion people on the planet, and fast fashion alone produces 100 billion pieces per year. So to say that model can ever be climate resilient, that it can ever be in sync with the planet and with people at the moment, is laughable, really. So I think that's, for me, that's my take. In terms of how to buy better, I agree with Kinita, please just buy whatever you need. I don't want to tell people that they should only buy sustainable brands. I think that everybody is, if you really love a piece of clothing, you can buy it from a fast fashion brand. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but you have to honor that, because someone has made that piece of cloth. And actually, when you speak to the workers who make for even the fast fashion brands, they take pride in what they've made. It's not different to an artisan or an heirloom product. Someone has put their time, their blood, sweat and tears, the time away from their family, their children, to make this piece of clothing. And the least that you can do is show it respect and wear it for a lifetime, and pass it on and care for it and mend it and sew it. So it's not about that. The problem is about this throwaway technique. So don't buy clothes that you're just going to wear once and think, well, it only costs whatever, $4, it only costs 500 rupees. I can just wear it for this one occasion and throw it away. That's the thing that we need to move away from. But in terms of where we buy from, get borrow from your friends and family where you can, go thrifting, mend stuff that you already have. And we have this amazing possibility in somewhere like India. I even, I grow out of clothes or things rip, and I take them back whenever I'm traveling back to Delhi, and I ask for them to be remade into something else, so an anarkali could be made into a skirt, for instance, if something rips or it doesn't fit again. And so I think we have this possibility that, why don't we embrace those practices our nannies would have wanted us to upkeep, and some of it was to do with economics, some of it was also to do with just honoring the things that you had as well. So I think honor the clothes that you have, and honor the people that made them.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And just sort of coming back to the whole sustainability in South Asia bit of it, Anica was telling me an interesting story about how her grandmother had bought these curtains from Manchester. Yeah, and her mother ended up wearing those curtains as a dress, and Anica and her sister ended up wearing those same curtains as another piece of clothing. And it just reminded me of exactly what the two of you have said, that these are, this was very common in South Asian tradition. And even just running to the tailor with, something that needs to be hemmed in, or a piece of clothing that needs to be altered. And that it's important to remember that That's very much at the core of how we consume clothes and how South Asia has manufactured and consumed garments in the past. I also want to ask you, Swati, as far as your work with the Remember Who Made Them campaign, has it made you more optimistic about the future? And then Kinita, would you also maybe reflect a little bit on, are you optimistic about the future as far as ethical fashion, sustainable fashion is concerned?
I think for me, it has made me more optimistic because I just think that, speaking to so many different garment workers and, ones that are running unions, they really want to see a different world, and they're fighting for it with so much pressure on them, and with risks that none of us would ever be able to fathom on the ground. But they really believe that there's a new possibility, a new way of looking at fashion that's possible as well. And so I think, I do stand in solidarity with them, and I get inspired by them when I see the future of fashion. I also think as well, I'm reminded by something that Ananya Bhattacharya, who's the head of Asia Floor Wage Alliance, which is a collective of different worker unions and collectives across Asia and across fashion and other labor industries. But she said, that actually consumer action is so important, because even though you might have thousands or hundreds of workers protesting in, their factory for access to water, basic safety, electricity, toilet breaks, like very basic things, some have often heard, but actually when you can amplify and visibilize what workers are demanding and get consumers to ask the brands for the same thing, suddenly that creates like a very expedited process. So brands, when they see some of their consumers asking questions about who made their clothes, about what's happening in X factory where their items are produced in India or in other places in the world, they then get in touch with the factory, and suddenly you will see changes, like they do happen quite quickly. And actually, one of the silver linings of COVID has been, because we have moved online, because there is this ability to reach people in a quicker way in some ways, workers are able to reach out and amplify their demands directly to consumers. And you are seeing those chains, kind of linked up. So whereas before, a consumer in somewhere like the UK, where I'm based, would just be a bit like these poor women in India or Bangladesh or whatever, like now you can put names to them, you can hear exactly what their demands are. And when you're then commenting or posting on social media or writing emails, it actually has like a very different effect than it did in previous years. And so I'm kind of held up by that ability. And I just feel like we need more visibilization, more amplification, and we need more people to be asking brands to be doing better as well, and asking their governments as well as to what are they putting in place. Because the problem with a lot of this is that our international trade treaties between countries actually allow for this exploitation to happen. So when I was talking about why Remember Who Made Them started, it was because of, brands had received orders that were completely made by workers, but because they weren't able to open shops, they were like, oh, we don't want these orders, even though they were delivered to the UK shores or to European or North American shores. And actually, that means that factories can't pay their workers, and workers are suddenly on the poverty line. But that is completely legal. Our trade treaties allow for that, for brands to be able to do that because they hold that power. And so, yeah, we do. There's a lot to do, but I feel like the more joined up campaigners are with consumers, with workers, and the more that they're exchanging the demands and calling for something that actually is about a transformative industry, I think that that's what's really exciting about the moment that we're in at the moment. And so I do feel hopeful.
That's good to hear. Kinita, do you share the hope?
I share the hope largely because I believe that Gen Z is a hell of a lot smarter than we were as millennials. I do believe that growing up, first of all, we really did not ask these questions in the way that young teenagers and young people do these days. They're no longer happy with a brand slapping one vegan leather thing into a collection and calling it sustainable. That would not fly in 2021. And it probably would have maybe 10 years ago. Nowadays, I see young people on the internet, on Twitter, as Swatee also mentioned, directly advocating, directly, tweeting at brands saying, this sounds like greenwashing to me, or really, but how much do you pay your workers? And this is the kind of discourse that I haven't seen growing up. I haven't seen this kind of discourse in mainstream media. Now, if you go to the comment section of virtually any of these big brands, whether it's H&M, whether it's Shein, any of them, and you look at all the comments, you are bound to find a bunch of top comments saying, but are you paying your workers? Is it true that you are not paying a living wage? Is it true that you did not pay for contracts during COVID? And these are some of the top comments that you'll see on multiple of these big brand social media accounts. And as Swatee has also mentioned, it has seen results. All of these brands are now not doing a great job of it, but at least they're making some kind of effort to address these issues. And I think that kind of consumer action does make a big difference, because brands would like us to think that it's our individual buying actions, such as so for example, coming back to the Sabyasachi and H&M thing, there was a interview, I believe, in Travel and Leisure, where they asked them, do you feel, this collection is sustainable? And they gave sort of this really vague, evasive answer, being like, yes, because it's so beautiful that people will continue to wear the pieces for a long time. Thus, it is sustainable. And I mean, like, it's a bit of a joke. Like what is that answer, right? And so, I mean, for example, that kind of thing was eaten alive online. People were like, excuse me, no longer are people going to let brands tell them that your individual buying decisions are what creates sustainability. People are now turning back and saying, no, it's the way that you union bust. It's the way that you are not paying wages. It's the way that you are using the wrong kind of materials. And they're turning it back on the brands and exposing this system. And so I think, that gives me a lot of hope. And I think that young people are really going to change the world. And I know that sounds idealistic, but from what I can see on Twitter at least, I think there is a chance, maybe.
Yeah, Anika, are you hopeful? Just to weigh in here.
Yeah, I actually feel very hopeful. In fact, I wanted to share a personal anecdote. By the way, girls, I am wearing a thrifted shirt that I bought in Japan a long time ago for today's show. But having moved so many houses, I was sharing this story with Gayeti earlier, having moved so many houses and you're taking a wardrobe from one place to the other. One day I put my entire wardrobe on a bed, said, my gosh, there are so many clothes. And that just gave me this realization. I was like, I'm going to try and not buy a single garment, even if it's a handkerchief, for at least a year. And I lasted a little over 1.5 years. And I was very, very proud of myself. But what I was most excited about was the mix and match fashion that came out of that effort. And that was really, really satisfying towards me. But to that thought, I wanted to ask you girls, right? Now, as our mindsets are changing, we are noticing our consumption patterns. Influencers are, sort of giving us more details about how better to purchase. What are the brands that we could look at that fall more within our philosophical leanings, where climate change, where sustainable fashion is concerned. But I can't help but notice that when all of those things are promoted, it is, after all, replacing one consumption pattern with another consumption pattern. So my question to both Kinita, Swatee, and Gayeti, for that matter, is how do we check those consumption patterns? And at what point do we need to stall our consumption before we call it retail therapy or self-care or something like that?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in first. That's such a good question, because I agree. And I think that some of it comes down to the problems of influencers in the first place, right? Like a lot of them, to have the time to create the content that we all love, like watching and consume, consuming in terms of media, it takes time and effort. And, for many of them, they do have to have sponsored posts. I'm not trying to, I don't want to absolve them of responsibility, but I think that the model is broken as to who we're looking up to, and why, because they're, the platform like Instagram itself, where a lot of influencers are built, like the whole model relies on consumption. Like it's telling you to buy stuff. All of us, while we're scrolling through our stories, will get sponsored posts like buy this, buy that. Like the entire system is based on that capitalist model of like consumption, and that actually, and so influencers, even if they are campaigners, even if they're buying into sustainable practices, you often see them being like in this quandary of like, well, I actually have to like pay my bills and make a livelihood, and the algorithm will not support me unless I do some of this as well. And actually their platforms become reduced. Like the Instagram algorithm is built for actually allowing people to consume and affiliate links. And so when you don't do that as an influencer, your influence actually reduces. So there's something there with like what we're looking to as like a space for receiving information and who is influencing us and why, which is created by an algorithm that is based on a capitalist model of consumption. But I think just going to your point, Anica, there's something there which is about actually we need to just like live within very basic means, really, because I just think our attachment to material possessions and things is so based on, well, it's wealth signaling, it's success, it's happiness signaling, and that's what our industries have told us.
Well, thank you, Kinita and Swatee, for joining us today. That's unfortunately all that we have time for. Anica, any parting thoughts?
Yes, to what Swati was saying about colonialism, I just want to leave us with this one thought. We had the British come in and take the best quality produce in terms of cotton, in terms of silk outside this country. And that was the colonialism we faced in the past. But there is a different kind of colonialism that exists right now. And I would like to call it capitalist colonialism with regards to the garment industry, especially. And that's something to think about as to what's that doing to developing countries where cheaper labor is available.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought and something that we can leave our listeners with to revisit. Are we in a new era of colonialism, and what kind of impact that's having on our production processes and our consumer behavior? So a lot more to talk about for episode number 2. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Swatee, Kinita. Thanks, Anica, of course, for doing this with me. And this podcast will be out on the citizen.in. Hope our listeners tune in every couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Bye.
Bye.